Ash drifted and clung to his skin the way snow used to in the hills above the kennels. And the smell was the same and not the same, cold memory buried under heat. The corridor was half gone, old stones vomiting sparks down into a red chasm, and his brother was a black bulk framed in flame. Gregor's helm had shattered earlier, the skull beneath pale as candle tallow and wrong, as if some carrion thing had been stuffed inside his dead face to wear it. The breath that raked from him was a grave's breath. Sandor remembered that breath in a different way, mead sour and hot when he'd been a boy, shoved face first into coals for a toy. "You never quit," Sandor said, and his voice sounded like the rasp of a knife across a whetstone. The ache down his ribs answered every word. His sword was nicked, his palm slick inside the gauntlet, and the world burned. Gregor came at him with a speed that mocked his size, masonry screaming under their boots. Sandor shifted, weight and memory, the old dance he'd learned watching men in the yard before he was big enough to lift a blunted blade. He let the first blow go wide and felt the stone tremble as it landed. Let the second scythe toward his head and met it with iron, his arm ringing all the way to the shoulder. The third he caught and turned, and the fourth he lost, the edge sliding past his guard to bite his mail and skin beneath. Pain flared white. Sandor bared his teeth at it like a dog. Gregor made a sound from the back of his throat, wordless, greedy, and struck again. Sandor stepped into the strike the way a man steps into surf, took the hurt, and jammed the point of his sword under the seam of Gregor's arm where plates met mail. He felt it go in, felt it rasp bone, and yanked free. Black blood welled hot and slow, and Gregor barely noticed. The mountain only turned his ruined head toward the knife as if annoyed, as if a fly had bit. "7 hells, you're dead and won't lie down." Behind that hulking shape was a fall that had once been a staircase, beneath it a red and moving sea. He could throw the big bastard down it and be done, if he could make him move. Gregor's weight was a wall. He pressed, relentless, his sword work more brute engine than art. Sandor took a step, then another, boot-scraping stone. Heat licked at his cheek, and the smell rose in waves, char, ash, the sweet rot of burning flesh, until the world was a forge and every breath blistered his throat. Something cracked on the level above them. Dust sifted down, grit peppering his teeth. Past Gregor's shoulder Sandor saw the sky go black and then milk white with smoke, and for a heartbeat he heard the faraway rush of wings. He thought of a girl with a hard little face like winter, eyes that had learned every sharp thing too young. He told her to live. He meant it even now. "Come on then," he said and spat blood. "Come on, you big cunt. Come and try." Gregor obliged. He came, sword in both hands, chop and chop again. Sandor let the blows drive him a half-turn so that the gap yawned at his brother's back, heat licking up to kiss that pale, ruined face. Gregor shifted a boot to find purchase. Sandor moved with him, a hinge on a gate. Their blades met and ground and parted, and then Sandor saw it. The small wrongness in Gregor's stance where he had to favor the injured arm, the way he led with weight he'd once anchored with a knee. Sandor lunged low, not for the arm but for the knee itself, smashing his pommel into the joint. Gregor staggered. Sandor took the high line and slashed at his face, not to kill. Nothing simple would kill this thing, instead to turn him, to anger him into clumsy. Gregor turned. He roared a sound that shook mortar, raised his sword overhead. Sandor stepped inside the arc and dropped his own blade, both hands grabbing marten-painted armor that had been his nightmare all his life. He drove his shoulder into his brother's belly and lifted as the floor betrayed them, as dust and light and heat made the world a narrow, loud thing. They hit the edge together. There was no railing now, only a lip of stone soot-slick with ash. Sandor's boot skidded. Gregor's heel went over. The weight of him dragged, and for a breath they hung together as they had in other moments. Him small and his brother vast, both tied by blood and pain and a father who'd bred dogs because he understood something about the world that Sandor still hated. He saw the kennel yard, the pups yipping stupid joy, and the black mouth of the brazier. Sandor let him go. Gregor's sword hand whipped and caught Sandor's forearm like a trap. He yanked with that impossible strength, trying to pull Sandor after him into the fire. Sandor twisted, giving the arm instead of the body, and the heat hit him like a struck bell. Fire opened its red throat beneath them, and he was a boy again, and the coals ate him. No, he thought, not today. He reached for the only thing at hand, a chunk of broken cornice half the size of his skull, and smashed it down onto Gregor's ruined face. He hit once, twice, the second blow throwing sparks against the bleeding white of bone. Gregor's grip faltered. Sandor tore free. His brother fell backward, heavy and stupid and enormous. The fire swallowed him. It swallowed the long sword with its nicked edge. It swallowed the armor that had dressed him all his life. For a moment the flames wore Gregor like a cloak redder than any Lannister's, and in that instant Sandor's mouth was full of the sweet fat smoke of old tallow, of cooked meat, and he gagged. He did not follow. He stood there with ash on his tongue, chest heaving, every piece of him cut or bruised or scorched, and listened to the roar of the city burning. He could not hear his brother burn. He waited long enough to be sure that he would not hear him climb back out, that the thing was gone, and only then did he look down at the hand that had held the stone. It shook. He flexed it, and the shake eased. The heat pressed against his back like 1,000 hands. He turned and stumbled through the broken doorway to the half-stair still standing, and found, on the landing below, the little body of the man who'd made Gregor into a joke of himself. Qyburn lay like trash discarded by the gods, skull split, gray hair stuck to red stone. His eyes had gone empty, sockets deep as the holes in Mother's icons. Sandor stepped over him without thought. Ash was falling thicker now, the air blown white. The dragon had made hundreds of little sons out of men, women, children, horses, carts. It had melted bells. Under the ash everything was the same color, rubble, bone, banners, and a kind of peace lived inside that sameness if you did not look hard enough to separate it. On the lower stairs he passed a child standing like a post with a rag doll clutched to her chest. Her hair was the pale brown of old straw, her face a mask of soot, her mouth open wide with no sound coming out. He stopped because she was there and because he could not step around her in that space without moving her. She did not look at him. She looked past him toward the higher fires. "Come on," he said, a rough thing in a rough voice. "That way's done." She did not move. Sandor raised a hand, glove black with ash, and lowered it again. He crouched, his body complaining with every hinge, and set his sword lengthwise on the stairs. There was a ringing somewhere, a bell that had not melted yet, or the memory of one. He reached with a slow, large hand and took the doll gently by a leg, tugging it. Her hands clamped tighter. Fine. He took one of those hands instead, prying little fingers loose one by one. She struggled weakly. "Don't want your bloody doll," he said. "Want you. Come." He got her moving by getting himself moving and dragging her hand with him, her feet scuffing on stone, and no sooner had he done it than the landing above them tore away in a groan like a beast, and sheets of flame flew down and kissed the steps where she had been. Heat washed over them, and the child screamed without sound, and his heart jumped hard enough to hurt. He kept her hand. He kept his feet. They went down. They crossed a corridor with half its wall peeled open, blue sky outside made wrong by black. Below, the world was nothing but white ash blowing in swells around wrecked carts and fallen poles and the dark heaps that had been people. The girl stumbled and fell to her knees in it and coughed. He bent and hoisted her under one arm as if she were a sack of grain. Her tears made clean roads down her face, cutting rivulets in soot. She did not clutch his neck. She did not do anything at all. At the base of the stairs a man with a singed beard lurched from the smoke, half blind, and blundered into Sandor so hard he almost dropped the girl. "Help?" the man said, and then something else. And then his eyes focused and he saw the burned side of Sandor's face and flinched. Sandor growled. A low, old sound that he knew for what it was. And the man bolted down the hall like a staggered deer. Sandor wanted to catch him and shake him and snarl, wanted to crack his head against the wall for looking at him like that when everything in the world was burning and it wasn't his face that was doing the worst of it. He did nothing. He took 3 breaths, each one a stripe of pain, and kept going the way that led down, through a door that had lost its latch, into the armory where the wall had blown out and ash fell in drifts through the open maw. He found a path along the inner curtain that stayed close to the shadow of the wall where the wind blew cold off the stone. The girl had stopped making any noise. When he glanced down, she met his eyes for a heartbeat, as if to measure him, and then went back to nothing. He knew that particular nothing. It had a careful shape to it. He bore her weight and the weight of himself and the weight of his sword down a stair his legs had climbed 1,000 times when he wore a different badge. At the gate, one of the gold cloaks was still trying to make himself a king out of a polearm. He planted himself in front of them and spread his arms as if a man could dam a river with his body. His lips formed a command, and then he saw the dead black smear of the city behind Sandor and the bloody nick in Sandor's mail and the child, and something in him cracked. "Out," he said, and jerked his chin. "Go." No one had to tell Sandor twice. He shouldered through the broken gate into the red mild afternoon, into a choking sky and a street that did not know what it had been 5 hours earlier. Doors hung open. Barrels had exploded along their seams from heat. A dead horse lay in a pool of its own fat, eyes like blisters, legs knocked to wrong angles, steam coiling up from it. A woman knelt, rocking, and the bundle in her lap was too small to be anything but what it was. Sandor put the girl down and crouched. "Your mom?" he asked, and heard how the words sounded in his mouth and wanted to spit it out. The girl shook her head. "Name?" She looked at the ash. "7 hells," he said softly. He put his hand on the top of her small head, the way a kennelman puts a hand on a wary dog's back. He was aware of every eye that swung toward him and then away. He watched the way people found tasks with their hands so they did not have to look too long at one more broken thing. He stood and went to the dead horse. The city had taught him ugly ways to be useful. He rummaged through the scorched harness, through the smashed cart it had been pulling. There, a wineskin mostly melted closed and another, half full of water, boiled and warm but wet. He carried it back. The girl drank without lifting her eyes. Water ran out the corner of her mouth and cut new roads in the soot. "Stay with that lot," he told her, pointing to a knot of people whose clothes said they'd been servants or tradesmen. "Get out of the city if you can. If you can't, find a cellar or the river." He found himself crouching. Again, his knee cracking. "It's worse above," he said, because that was all he had to give. She nodded once, a tiny motion that could have been the way a straw on a roof shifts when a bird lands. He rose and turned his own face toward the gate that would spit him onto the King's Road. He had done the work he had come to do. He had told a girl to live and managed not to die with his brother. He had nothing to keep him here but the old habit of bitter service, and he had chewed the marrow out of that bone. On the road beyond the mud and ash there were people moving like a river that had forgotten its banks. He slid into the slow current without speaking to any of them. A big armored man with blood in the bend of his elbow and one side of his face melted. Just another monster among the things that had lived under stones while the sun was out. No one tried to stop him. The city exhaled men in the livery of houses that had been undone in a day, women with their shifts singed to their thighs, boys with terrible new mouths. They spilled into the countryside because there was nowhere else to go. A black horse stood tethered to a half-burned post where a stable had once been, its reins tied with the sailors, not because someone had meant to come back for it before the dragon changed the shape of that future. It rolled its eye at Sandor, then lowered its head and chewed the rope on the post. He untied it and examined the saddle with the same care he would have given a wound. The girth was cracked but held. He ran a hand down the horse's shoulder. It snorted and swung its head at him, testing. He bared his teeth right back at it. The horse decided to tolerate him. "Stranger," he said by old habit, and hoisted himself into the saddle. The leather was hot through his breeches. The horse flicked an ear as if to say, "I've heard worse." He rode north without looking back, because looking back felt like putting his face in the brazier again out of pride, and what sort of fool does that twice? The road beyond the outermost huts ran between little fields and orchards and the bones of 100 old war camps. Trees had bleached in old years of drought into white hands reaching. Now their new leaves were dusted with ash. The sky found a way to be blue in patches. He took the horse off the hard-packed center to let refugees pass, went at a steady amble that made his ribs complain in time. In his head he measured distances without knowing he did it. The fork for the Rose Road, the low bridge over the little stream whose name he'd never known, the copse that had been bandit-haunted in the second year of the Boy King and cleared by hard men with hard appetites who hadn't minded the job. He did not want to think about kings. He did not want to think the word. He let the horse choose its own pace, and the day became a string of small choices: where to pass a broken cart, where to drink from a trickle that a dragon had not boiled. He could feel his brother on him still. It wasn't blood anymore. It was the shape of having always stood in someone else's shadow. Toward dusk a clutch of riders came backward down the road from the north, muddied, eyes peeled. Their leader wore half a suit of plate and the faded green and yellow of a house that had thrown its lot with a queen who was now something else. He put up a hand when he saw Sandor, and Sandor did not reach for his sword. He did not have that sort of death in him right now. "You?" the leader said, drawing rein to look hard at Sandor's scars. "You were." "No," Sandor said, and looked at the man's horse instead, because he did not owe a name to anyone and he wanted the man to know it. "Go on with you. There's a city to pick over if you've got a stomach for it. No king's law there. No law at all." The man's face worked. He spat and wheeled his horse without answering. Sandor watched them go until their backs were small. He spoke to stranger then, because the horse did not care how ugly a mouth was and only understood tone. "We keep north till the air stops tasting like coin," he told him. "Then we find where the world wobbled least and see whether any of it stands." They camped under a little spinney where ash had not fallen thick and the leaves were only dusty. He built a small fire because the night would be cold and because the smell of burning let him decide to breathe anyway. The trick was small fire, tight fire, the kind of fire a kennelman builds because he understands that heat needs tending or it gets ideas. The horse cropped grass. Sandor drank from the water skin and set his back against a tree and breathed in time with the crack and pop. Sleep came like a thing that can't enter a house without being invited. He let it in. When he dreamed of the hill where the old kennel had been, of a door that had never quite latched right, of a boy with meat between his teeth because he was too hungry to wait for stew. The door opened and Gregor stood in it, a giant in the anger that filled him, and behind him the brazier's coals were an animal whose red mouth opened and opened. Sandor woke with his heart punching his ribs. He sat in the dark and counted breaths and the distance the fire had traveled in its circle and the small sounds of a horse shifting weight. He thought of the little girl in the ash and the small road the water had cut down her face and found he could not remember her eyes. The next day the sky cleared to a hard blue with a thin high cloud like scraped milk. The city smoke was a smear south now. The road held more people and fewer the longer he rode until by noon he could pretend he was only a man on a horse traveling for his own reasons and no day had ever held a dragon's shadow. He passed a farm with its door open and its goats picking through a trampled garden. He passed a burned cart with no one near it, the iron tires of its wheels cooled into ugly ovals. At a lean-to that had decided, perhaps wisely, to call itself an inn, a man was boiling scrawny chickens in a kettle drum and selling bowls for copper. Sandor slid off stranger and let his knees shout at him and took his bowl to the shade of the lean-to's overhang. The man looked at his scars and then away. A woman with a baby on her hip looked and did not look away. The child stared as if a dragon had walked in to ask for soup. "North is what?" the soup man asked to the air. "North is quiet, they say. North is men with machine voices speaking a new king's name. Say it like it was always true." "Quiet doesn't last," Sandor said, and drank broth that tasted of bone and smoke and memory. "Where are you from?" The man made a gesture that could mean anywhere within a day's walk. "From before, like all of us." Sandor finished and paid. He swung back into the saddle and did not look to see if the child would keep staring. He had seen himself reflected in men's eyes and in river water full of silt, and he knew what he looked like. He preferred the version with fewer words under it. By the time he reached the place where the King's Road crosses the little stony stream before it bends toward the riverlands proper, the air had changed. It smelled of mud and growing things and the distant green rot of a swamp that had been there since the first men were still figuring what to do with their hands. Birds were making the kind of noise that meant the world hadn't ended everywhere. The road here was pitted, patched by men in years when someone had ordered that it should be. Once he'd ridden this way behind Lannister men bright as tin, a dog on a chain. He knew where the inn lay where one could trade rumors for ale. He had said often that he did not care about rumors. It was a kind of lie. Rumor told you who wanted what, and a man who ignored that got surprised. He saw the inn's roof first, its thatch patched with drab reed. The signboard that's supposed to swing over the door had fallen, and someone had propped it against a post. The paint had flaked, so you couldn't tell what it had ever meant to be. It didn't matter. The place had lived under 100 names and would live under 100 more if the roads kept their weather. He tied Stranger to a post and patted his neck. The horse shook his mane, catching the light like oil. They suited each other. He went inside. The common room had a dozen tables and half as many men and women, the big hearth black and cold because the day didn't call for it. An old woman with hair like straw kept a pot going on a trivet, and a younger woman, her daughter or sister or nothing at all to her, filled tankards with beer that was half flat and grateful to be so. Heads turned when he ducked under the door lintel. He ignored the flinch that was habit and went to a corner because corners kept a man from being surprised. The old woman brought him ale before he could ask for it. He nodded thanks. He drank. When the younger woman drifted his way with a bread trencher piled with onions and some meat that had known a better day, he let her set it down and handed her coin without looking up. "You came from south," a man said 2 tables away. "From the city," Sandor chewed. "I came from a fire." The man made a noise that was mostly throat and could have become a laugh if it had found its way out. "All right," he said. "Any queen in that fire? Any queen left?" "Don't know," Sandor said. The room had changed shape around the question, the way rooms do when a word falls into them that changes more than air. It's the sort of thing men like to decide when the shouting stops. "Decided already then," the man said. "I heard a raven took wing from the ruins of the hall and came down on the blackened arm of a certain lord and told him the name of a king who's never warmed a throne." He lifted his tankard with 2 fingers. "I heard the little man with the clever mouth made a speech. Birds tell lies quicker than men," Sandor said. He ate and tasted onion and sawdust. The girl with the beer stood near his shoulder longer than she needed to. He felt her there and knew it and did not give her his face to stare at. "The new lot will be sending writs," another man said, "telling us all the world is healed. That's what they do. And there'll be men who never read a writ," the old woman said. "And they'll take what isn't theirs until somebody hits them with a stick. My stick's a broom. It's not much, but it's better than what most have." Sandor finished eating and pushed the trencher away. He felt the thing inside that had made him come north settle a little, the way a stormboat settles in its berth. He had no love for kings. He had less love for men who told themselves they were knights. He had nothing useful inside him for building halls or reciting words behind oaths. But he understood dogs and roads and the shape a man makes when he intends to hurt someone and what stops him. He understood what fear felt like in a horse's skin and in a girl's hand. He understood the way quiet got torn by small greedy men in small hungry bands after the bigger wars had burned out. He stood. The younger woman stepped back a half pace, the way one does when a big thing gets up. "Got iron?" he asked the old woman, and she blinked at him. "Nails, chain, a bit of wire. I'll buy. Need to mend a girth and make a loop for a skewer." She gave him a long look. "Round back," she said finally. "Under the awning. There's a bin." He went out into the yard where chickens made their little idiot noises and a fox watched with a sharp face from under the hedge. In the bin he found a handful of nails bent into fishhooks and a chain whose links were half worn through. He took what he could use and left coin and found himself smiling at the idea of a broom as a stick. There was an honesty to it. He was mucking with the girth when he heard voices at the yard gate, the kind that made the chickens go wary and the fox go away on cat feet. Men with voices like that tasted other people's moan. "Why in the air?" "Nice horse," one of them said. Sandor kept working. He hammered a rivet flat with the flat of his knife pommel, listening to the boots on crushed gravel come closer. "You want to keep your fingers," he said finally without looking up. "Keep them." The boots stopped. He could see their shadows on the ground in front of him, and in those shadows he could read posture stupidly proud. He lifted his head. There were three. The one in front had a leather jack that had never been his size, too tight over a barrel chest. His beard grew where beard wanted, and the knife scars that bracketed his mouth had healed in ridges sunburn had found. He had a short spear set on a cut-down haft, and he held it the way a man holds a stick he thinks makes him boss over everything smaller than a stick. The two behind him wore chain shirts gone to brown with neglect and had the look of men who had not slept under a roof that was theirs for a year. "City's vomiting him out," the front man said, grinning at Sandor's face and looking pleased with himself because he'd managed not to flinch. "Every road. Bad for horses. Bad for inns. Good for men who know where to put a hand." "Careful," Sandor said. "You're about to mistake this for a gentle place." "Isn't," the man said. He shifted the spear. 3 coppers for the tether, 2 for the saddle. You can keep the horse if you like. We're not unkind." Sandor studied him. He felt old in that moment, and steady, and full of a kind of humor that had nothing to do with laughter. He looked down at the rivet he'd flattened and then put the knife away easy. He stood. "Try," he said. The man lunged with the spear as if a door had swung open inside him and shown him how to do it. The point came for Sandor's belly. Sandor turned and let it slide along his hauberk and punched the haft with his forearm to lift it and take the man forward. He stepped aside, caught the haft again as the man stumbled, and yanked. The spear came free. Sandor flipped it in his hands by old memory and planted the butt in the man's instep. Bone cracked. The man screamed, a grateful little sound that knew how to find air. One of the others came in with a slash low aimed at the hamstring. Sandor brought the spear around like a broom. "Yes, a broom will do," and knocked the slash away, then jabbed the blunt end into the man's belly. The chain took most of it, but breath hoofed out of him, and he doubled enough that Sandor could set the point of the spear under his jaw gently, like a kiss from something that had once been a snake. The third had stopped where he was, eyes on the burned half of Sandor's face, but seeing something else now too. He took a little step back. "Take your boss and go," Sandor said softly. "Tell the next man you meet he'll find a broom on the road north. Tell him it sweeps both ways." The man with the broken foot made a wet noise behind his teeth. His friend eased him away, charm gone from his shoulders. The third man kept his blade in hand until he reached the gate, then shoved it into its sheath with a motion that was more about making his hands feel busy than anything useful. Sandor watched them go because you always watch them go. He made sure they kept going. When the yard was theirs again, the fox slid back and nosed at a scrap of cartilage the chickens had been arguing over. Stranger flicked an ear and went back to considering grass. Sandor picked up the chain he'd half-liked and wove it into a loop on the saddle with the care of a man braiding a child's hair. The riverlands opened to them like a book that had been shut and now cracked along its old spine. He rode those roads for days. He passed men with sleeves torn off coats to make bandages and women who walked like their hips were new to them because they were carrying babies they'd made with men who had turned to ash. He did not count how many times he saw men with bad ideas look at him and weigh the cost and decide to think of something else. He slept under hedges and eaves and in a hayloft once where the hay dust made him sneeze like a fool. He woke in the night sometimes and heard nothing but his own heart. He did not miss the south. By the time he reached the fork that would have led him toward Riverrun, rumor had found its way into the round mouths of children. They had names to sing. They sang a king no one had expected because that is the most comfortable kind to invent. The boy with the empty eyes and the chair he'd never looked at until someone told him to. They sang of a queen in the north who wore snow like a cloak. They sang that a wolf had kissed a dragon on the mouth and stolen its breath. Sandor did not correct them because children's songs were not facts, and because he had known a girl with a wolf in her face who had lived at last, and he wanted the night to hold her alive however the song pleased. The inn at the crossroads still stood because it always did. Its sign had become a piece of idleness in a hedge, painted over 3 times on 3 sides with 3 different ideas of what it once had meant. A big-boned woman with a round face ran it now. A woman with a laugh like a dropped bucket and arms that said she did not mind fetching water. She had eyes that took things in the way a house cat watches a mouse hole. She saw his face and did not startle. He liked her for that and bought a room on her second floor without haggling. He rolled his shoulders and breathed pergola air and felt steady for the first time since the red stare. "Heard anything that's worth knowing?" he asked her when the room was paid for and a bowl of stew had set a different sort of fire in his belly. "Worth to who?" she returned. "To a tall man with a half-roasted face and a horse he likes better than a bed? Or to a girl with a belly to feed and a dead father?" "Both," he said, because he did not mind the feel of being mocked by someone who did it with their whole living face instead of knife scars. She wiped at him and leaned a hip against the bar. "This side of the trident, the only banners that matter now are those a man makes for himself. We've had clever men come through with words like law and levy and liege. They think those words will make a fence around what they want. But there's a bunch of pretty boys from the Golden Company run to ground in the marsh gullets by men from the Fingers, and they've taken to asking tolls with sword points. There's a Tarth woman rides with a royal writ in her purse and a squire who looks like he got kissed by a rosebush. She's been telling men that the boy on the throne has a list of names in his head and a way of knowing which names to put in it." "A big woman with a sword," Sandor said before he could stop the smile that moved one side of his mouth. "Yellow hair and a jaw like a cliff? That's the one," the innkeeper said, unabashed. "She's been up the leg of the trident and back twice, and she keeps her coin tidy. She'll be by again, I'd say, before the wheat thinks about ripening. If you're of a mind to keep trouble from my yard, you can stay as long as it suits you. If you're of a mind to make it, you can finish your stew out by the tree and keep riding." "Your yard," he said, and nodded because he liked people who said the quiet parts out loud. "I keep trouble like my own." He wiped a piece of bread in the bowl and ate it. He slept in the bed and dreamed nothing that he could keep hold of. And in the morning he bought a bolt of thread, mended the torn seam in his sleeve, and sat under the leaning tree that had watched 100 quarrels turn to graves. He was thinking of the hill where the kennels had been and whether there would be anyone living there now, whether the old man who had brushed his pups until their fur shone like satin would have found a way to die before men like the mountain came for his little well and his sweet dry apple trees. The thought made him bitter and made him gentler all at once. He had never been back to that land. He had left it behind the day he'd run from a hall and a father and a brother and hadn't looked back except to spit. "Thought you were dead." The voice came from the yard gate, and he knew it before he turned because it held that particular combination of honor and irritation he had rarely heard outside of her mouth. Brienne of Tarth came in mounted on a rangy mare whose coat had been groomed to a dull shine. Her hair braided back because she did not have hands enough to play with it, her armor clean, her sword easy at her hip. The boy who rode behind her, long-limbed and open-faced, looked around the inn yard with curiosity like hunger. The writ she carried was tucked inside a leather case under her gorget. Her eyes were still brilliant. They were worse now, because men like that always were at the end of wars when there was no lord to call their names and their captains had to invent crowns for themselves out of belts. The captain here called himself Ser Dario in the afterglow of a name that had belonged to someone else, and he wore 3 blue feathers in his hair because he thought being a joke made him safe from other jokes. He had 40 men who wore bits of uniform like badges left over from a better time. They thought the world owed them coins for getting their faces burned. They had taken the Clegane land's little hall and put out the hounds because they did not like being watched by clear brown eyes. The dogs had gone to ground or to the forest or to somebody's doorway with their tails low. They had put the old kennelman's daughter to work polishing boots and bruises as they saw fit. They had set a man with a broken nose to guarding the well and charging coppers for water because some men like the feeling of deciding who drinks. Sandor and Brienne and Podrick rode up to the track that led to the hall and saw the boys on the post with their spears leaning on their shoulders and their thoughts somewhere else. Sandor saw the fields beyond where nothing had been put in the ground on time and nothing would yield what it should because men had been afraid to walk out past bowshot of the gate. He felt the old flat hot piece of himself that understood this sort of geometry wake up. "Want your writ?" he asked Brienne. Her jaw worked once and she shook her head. "I want them gone," she said. Good, he said, and got down off Stranger and loosened the cinch and let the horse go to graze because the horse had more sense than many men and would come when called better than many too. He unbuckled his sword belt and rolled his shoulders and flexed his sore hand and went forward on his feet because a gait is a funny thing when you approach it alone. One of the boys at the post saw him and put a hand on his spear. "Hold," he called. His voice trembled. Sandor stopped 10 paces shy where a thrown spear would still land short unless gods took an interest. "Want your day to end without any holes in it?" he said. "You might ride your arses out of here to the next hedge and take a shit on that instead of where you stand." The boy blinked. He saw the face and did not flinch, and Sandor revised him upward by a thumb's width. "Captain doesn't like leaving," he said. "Captain's going to like bleeding less," Sandor said, and saw over the boy's shoulder that men were rousing from naps and the old habit of thinking nobody would come for them so soon. He saw the man at the well drop his bucket rope and reach for a cudgel. He saw a girl with hair in 2 braids like the handles of a basket slip past the well's brick lip and move soft along the wall like a mouse. He did not look at her because it would ruin her. He kept his eyes on the boy and found a part of his mouth that could make a shape like a smile without his face cracking. "Call your captain," he said. They called him. He came in his stupid feathers and the idea of a beard. He saw Brienne and the writ case and smiled because he thought he understood things words could do. He saw Sandor and the smile got complicated. "You're a rumor," the captain said. "I've heard 3 different endings for you." "You're a cheap copy," Sandor said. "I've heard this act before. It stank then, too." The men on the wall made noise like crows. Men love their captains to be mocked until somebody gets stabbed, and then they go the way the stab goes. The captain's mouth tightened. He gestured, and 5 men took places with archer stances along the parapet made from timbers thrown up in a hurry. "We'll start with the writ," he said to Brienne, pretending he had not been insulted and would grow bigger by pretending, as men like him always do. "And then perhaps we'll look at your purse. Or your boy. He looks like a good laugh." Brienne moved before Podrick could. She stepped so he was behind her and her hand went to her sword as if it traveled there on its own. "This land is under the peace of the realm," she said, calm and loud. "And the people here deserve better than to be shaken from their work by men with no names." "Ah," the captain said and opened his hands. "I've a name, Dario. No surname. But who returns things to their rightful owners now that so many owners are ash?" "Men with oaths," she said. "Men with sticks that are more than broom handles." He laughed. Sandor wanted to hate her for the line, but he found he didn't. He took 1 step forward and another until the archer's bowstrings tightened like cats pulling their shoulders up before a jump. He planted his feet in the dust and scraped the toe of his boot like a mad dog about to spring. "You've got 40, maybe 50, he said. "Half of them good only for pushing old men in the ditch. A few who remember which end of the spear doesn't go in your hand. You got yourselves a well and a little hall that was never meant to be a castle and a path leading up to your gate that a blind man could walk in the dark. You think you can hold this like it means you've won something. You think you can wear your feathers and make girls spit their mouths dry when you look at them. Here's a thing I know. Men who like making girls dry like that die ugly. Might not be today. Might be the year turns. But ugly comes for you. Today could be the day if you get proud." The captain's face did something tight between the eyes. "Who are you?" he asked. "You talk like you know my sleep." "Me?" Sandor said, and set his hand on his sword hilt like a kindness. "I'm the dog you kicked and forgot to run from." He felt Brienne's eyes on the side of his face. He saw in the corner of his vision that the girl had moved another rod's length along the wall toward an open gatehouse door, and now 6 others had found her courage and were ghosting behind her. Old men and 1 woman with a scar that had whitened with age and a boy with a broken arm wrapped in splints made of kindling. The archers had their attention on Brienne's gold hair and Sandor's burned face. The well guard had his back. To the well because it made him feel important. "Archers," the captain said, and Sandor held up 1 hand. "Don't," he said. "You'll hit me 3 times and her once, and then it'll be all the same to me because I won't feel it." He rolled his shoulders. "Or we can do this. You open the gate. You walk out. You leave your bows. You take the road to the west where nobody will be surprised to see your backs. You keep walking. Nodox, noeros. We call it your lucky day. You make offers like a lord, the captain said softly. Ugly lord. What's your house, lord? What's your name? I don't keep one, Sandor said. Names are for men who want to be written down. I want holes in the ground where men like you used to sleep. Shoot him, the captain snapped, because men like that always end by telling someone else to do it. The first arrow took Sandor in the hauberk above his heart and smashed part of a link into his skin like a nail. It didn't go through. The second skidded along the curve of his pauldron. The third went wide because the archer's hand shook. Sandor went forward. He went up the path like he had gone up stair after stair in the Red Keep, except now the heat was inside him and the air felt clean. He slid to the left when a spear came for him and let it pass and caught the haft and yanked and drove the point into the dirt to tangle its owner. He shouldered the gate just as the boy with the broken arm staggered out of the tower door and into the well guard's legs. The man shouted. The woman with the scar swung her broom. He saw the broom as if a god had told him to, and hit the nearest archer in the face with the strength of a life of lifting pails and children in grief. Brienne was moving, too. She was a bright thing when she fought, not because of polish but because she did not hold anything back from the moment her blade left the scabbard. She cut the spear haft between Sandor and the men inside as if she were cutting bread and followed the cut with a shield edge to the nose that made a wet sound. Podrick had a blade in hand and a look on his face like he could not believe his arm knew what to do with it, and he did it anyway. After that it was a pile of small, ugly things. Sandor's sword made short work of men who had been knights in a story they told themselves when they were tired. Brienne's shield broke bones used to hurting other bones. The old woman got her broom into a man's mouth and shoved him backward until he fell over the well curb and cracked his head. The captain with his feathers tried to find a place to stand that didn't require him to get cut. He found one behind the well and ducked and made for the hall. Sandor went through men like underbrush to follow him because men like that need a particular end. He got to him by the door of the little hall, where someone had once carved 3 hounds into the lintel and then painted them black upon gold and then tried to gouge them out when the men with feathers came. The captain's sword was out. He held it with 2 hands and swung like a man chopping kindling. Sandor took the first swing on his blade and stepped into the second and felt it bite at the meat of his shoulder in a way that would be tender tomorrow and not worth the price of a curse today. He headbutted the captain because they were close and because it was an honest way to put a stop to a mouth. He heard the nose break. The captain reeled and Sandor put his foot behind the man's ankle and sent him down hard. He put his boot on the hand that held the sword. Bones protested. The sword fell. Sandor kicked it away and crouched and took the man under the jaw with his big hand and looked into his eyes because it mattered to look. "We can drag you before some lordling," he said. "He'll talk out his arse about peace. We can hang you and leave you for crows. Or we can give you to the well and let your men drink on your bones." The captain tried to spit. His mouth was full of blood and it ran down his chin and chin to chest. "Make it quick," he said thickly, because he had false pride even now. Sandor turned his head and spat into the dust to wash the taste of that request from his mouth. "You don't get quick," he said. "You get a long walk." He hauled the captain to his feet and dragged him past the well where the woman with the scar stood with her broom like a staff taller than she needed. He dragged him through the gate and set him on the road and pointed west. "You run," he said to the man as men put down their bows all along the wall and slid out of the yard like shameful cats. "You run until your feet bleed. If I see you anywhere this side of the Blue Fork by moonrise, I'll teach you how to drink from your own skull." The man ran. He ran like men run when they have never run except in dreams where they don't make it. His legs pumping and the feathers bobbing with terrible dignity. His men went after him in ones and twos, turning over their shoulders to look, and then more when Brienne moved them with her eyes the way a sheepdog moves sheep by being the idea of a wolf. They left their dead because men do, and their bows, and a smell of old sweat and fear. The yard filled then with a different kind of noise as the people too careful to be caught under the well's guard came out from the walls, from the little holes they'd made with their bodies these past weeks. Children who had been very quiet all morning began to make the noise children make when they understand they won't have to be so quiet for a while. Dogs came, cautious. The old kennelman's daughter came and stood with her hands on her hips, and Sandor could see in the shape of her mouth the ways a life had bid it. "You're one of them," she said to him finally. Not to Brienne, who had the writ and the shining sword, but to him, because she saw his face and the way he had looked at the lintel. "But you aren't them." "I was born here," he said. It was the first time he had said that in all the years he'd had a voice and a reason not to. The words felt wrong and right in his throat. She looked at him the way a hound looks at a stranger who knows exactly where to scratch. "We could use hands," she said. "Men broke the hinges. I want the gate to shut again." "I can fix hinges," he said. He did. With the chain from the inn and the nails from under the awning and the skill of a boy who had learned he could make things with his hands that weren't bruises, he set the gate muscles back into place. The girl with the basket-handle braids brought him a jug of water, and he drank and wiped his mouth with the back of his wrist and looked at the yard. He had thought the act of driving away the men would make him feel like something had been finished. Instead, it felt like something had opened. Brienne stood watching him when he turned. "You mean to stay?" she said. "For a bit," he returned. "Gate needs to shut. Well, needs a cap. You smell it? Iron in it. They drop things down." "You going to take your father's haul?" she asked. There was no mockery in it, only a question. "I don't want halls," he said simply. "Let the dogs live." She nodded. "The North will be pleased to learn there's one less nest in the Riverlands for bad men to coil in. I'll send word." He asked, before he could stop himself, "She doing well? The red one?" It was not the question he had meant to ask of all the ones that had lodged under his tongue, but it was the one his mouth chose. Brienne's eyes softened, and that was the whole of her answer, and more than any careful word could have been. "Good," he said, and looked at his hands because he had to. "Tell her if you like that the world still has roads and there's someone riding them who watches. Don't tell her who. Let her think it's the wind." Brienne smiled then, one of her rare full ones that made her look like the girl inside the armor who had once wanted what girls want and discovered she was better at other things. "I'll tell her that," she said. She swung up into the saddle and Podrick with her. "There are pockets like this in a dozen places," she said, serious again. "If you get bored putting hinges right, follow the road and you'll find more." "I won't get bored," he said, and meant it. She went. He watched her go down the path and out onto the road and watched the dust rise and settle in the sun. He turned back to the yard and found that a boy had brought out a perishable little crate of nails that had not been perished yet and a hammer whose handle had been fixed with a strip of rawhide. He took them and set to work with a motion that became breath and breath that became patience. The sound of it made the dogs come and sit and watch, and the sound of their breath became part of the day. He slept in a narrow bed in a corner room under the eaves that night and dreamed he was small enough to crawl under a table and go to sleep there while men above banged their cups and shouted and the dogs lay their heads on his legs. He woke at dawn to birds. He went to the well and pulled water until it ran cold and clear again. He helped the boys pull a broken cart out of the gate to be cut for wood. He took off his armor for the first time in 3 days and felt his skin lift under the heat. He found the old knife marks carved into a stable post he'd made as a child when he had wanted to be taller faster, a notch for each week, and touched them and touched the notch he could not remember making. The people began to ask him small things. Could his hands fix a door latch? Could he talk to a wild bitch who kept stealing eggs? Could he stand at the gate while the old man took a shit? He did the small things and found the hour filled up and the day and then the week. He was there the afternoon a raven with a scrap of new royal silk on its leg lit on the roof beam, and the old kennelman's daughter sent her boy up to catch it with gentle hands because she did not want to be ungentle with anything that came to her in peace. He watched as she slid the ribbon off and unrolled the paper and frowned at the words and then smiled. "King on the throne," she told him, plain. "Boy with eyes like a forest." Men swore. Women too. "They want us to send a tally of men and grain and to cut new spears." She paused. "They want to know if there's peace." "And is there?" he asked. sitting on the step with the dog whose first owners had called him Bandy, asleep with his head on Sandor's boot. She shrugged. For now. For this yard. She folded the paper with more care than it deserved. What is peace, anyway? Is it this? You with a hammer. Me without a man spitting when I stand up. It's a piece, he said. Of something. He sent the raven back with a scrap of parchment of his own in a hand that looked like it had stirred mud with a stick to make letters. He wrote his piece. That the well ran clear again and the gate held. That the men with feathers had gone west and a rumor of their captain dead in a ditch had reached them from a peddler who liked the sound of news. That dogs had begun to sleep in the sun again. He did not sign it. He tied it to the raven's leg and lifted it toward the sky and watched it pump up into the blue like a black leaf on a wind. He stayed through the wheat and the reaping, through the small feasts that still felt like sin because in too many places the gods had been fed unwilling meat. He stayed until men stopped coming to put tolls on water and found the road west of the Blue Fork safer than it had been, for reasons they did not try hard to discover. He stayed until autumn made the air crisp as bitten apples and the trees along the lane that had once known the shape of his boy steps turned the color of old coins. He stayed, and the days wore the shape of work and more work and resting in a chair that had wobbled until he cut a new wedge to set it right. Then Brienne came again with the first snow braided into her cloak and a new white cape at her throat, sword at her hip, and a squire who rode with a different kind of ease. She had lines at the corners of her eyes that had not been there before. She swung down and stood before him, and he saw the way she held herself, and he knew before she spoke. She wants you, Brienne said. The queen in the north. She would speak with you. If you don't care to go, that is the end of it. She said I was to say it that way. He looked at the gate he had set right and the well lid he had mended twice now because men are rough with the things they love. He looked at the boys in the yard wrestling over nothing and the woman with the old scar laughing like a woman who has learned to trust that morning will come. He looked at the hill above the yard where the kennel had been and saw in his mind's eye a boy with meat between his teeth and a hand that had not yet learned to close into a fist. I'll go, he said. He left the next morning when the frost made the grass crunch under strangers' hooves, and the old kennelman's daughter pressed a cloth-wrapped loaf into his hand and the dog Bandy tried to follow and had to be told twice to stay and hated it but obeyed. He rode with Brienne and Podrick and watched the riverlands fall away, wheat stubble under a thin skin of ice, the inn at the crossroads offering a hand to the road like it had always done. He crossed the Trident where its water ran a new brown after rains and thought of hands he had held that day. He put the city behind him again. He went north. Winterfell was a thing risen out of the earth wearing stone and snow. He had been there once under a different sky and a different lord, on roads that had not known dragon scorch. It was the same and it was not. The gods would smelled the same. The yard clanged with boys making fists of their hands and learning to use them. There were dogs. He waited in a chamber not overwarmed, a fire kept tidy by someone who also knew about fires that get ideas. He did not put his hands out to it. He studied the weave of a carpet with white threads like frost. He was not good at waiting and did it anyway. When the door opened he stood because whatever else he was not a man who would meet her sitting down. She came in with ice in her hair and a touch of the fox in the set of her mouth, wearing a dress that would have made courtiers bow differently and boots meant for walking. There was a crown at her temples made not of points but of northern things, simple and stubborn. Her eyes were the ones he remembered except that they were not. They had learned more and learned it the right way. For a heartbeat the shape of the chamber held the shape of a child under a bed, of blood on a knife, of the stale breath of a man too fond of power. Then it broke and became this day. You lived, she said. So did you, he said, and felt his mouth make that shape that might have been a smile if it had more practice. He had meant to say something else. He had meant to say that she had grown hard in the way a blade does when it is honed properly, not brittle like glass. He had meant to say he had watched roads like the ones that might bring harm to her and found them agreeable. He had meant to tell her that he had told a girl to live and that she had, and that he liked the taste of that a little. He said only what would sit in his mouth without breaking. They stood with the fire between them for a fat, useful silence. She stepped closer then, and he saw what the crown did to the air around her. He liked it. It made other men do things with their shoulders. It made him want to stand easier. "You could stay," she said. "There are men who would tell you where to sleep. There's work in the yard. There are miles and miles of wall to lean on when you're feeling pensive." There was humor in that last word, and it sat on her like sunlight that had remembered winter. "Or you could go. I was never good with walls," he said, "and pensive makes my teeth hurt." She did not look disappointed. She looked like someone who had offered a slice of bread and been happy to see a man who knew he could say no to it. "Then what do you want, Sandor Clegane?" He took longer than was comfortable to answer because it was a question he had not been asked this way. He felt the words come up like stones from a well. "Roads, my lady," he said at last, and it would have been strange to add the title to her name in the old days, but now it was right. "And a kind of work that doesn't have a song. There are bad men in ones and twos. There are girls with their mouths gone dry. There are gate hinges that want setting right. Send word, if you like, when the worst of them set up shop. I'll sweep." Her mouth did that little thing again, the one that kept a smile from being disrespectful to sorrow. "We'll hire you as a broom then," she said. "A very large, very ugly broom." He snorted. "You pay on time?" "We will," she said, "and not always in coin." She stepped around the fire and stood beside him, and for a moment he felt how decorum lived on the tongue and did not bite it. She reached and put her hand briefly on his burned cheek. Not a caress, exactly, more the way you lay a hand on a stone, you know, a familiar doorframe. He held still because moving would have been wrong. Her hand was cool and alive. "You saved me more than once," she said softly. "I didn't say it right before." He remembered a night and a knife and the way the city had smelled under fog and fear. He remembered a song he could not sing. He shrugged, and it meant the opposite of what shrugs usually do. "Go on," he said roughly. "Say you're grateful. Then let me out of this stone." "I'm grateful," she said, and laughed when she saw his face. He liked the sound. He did not know he'd wanted to hear it. She stepped back then and was queen again. "There are men at the gates who travel more than they prefer," she said. "They'll leave you with a purse and a letter that opens some doors. Don't use the letter if you don't want to. Use the purse." He left Winterfell under a sky that held snow until noon and then let it go, small and soft. He wore a cloak someone had cut down for him that did not mind his height and a new pair of boots that didn't pinch where the old pair did. He had a purse that made a small clink when he moved and a letter he folded into the lining of his glove because that is how much he meant to use it. He took the road to White Harbor because he had never seen the sea there under honest weather, and from there he meant to follow the coast southward, because the way men did harm changed with the shore and it was good to change with it. On the first night, he camped under a line of pines with their needles making a soft bed that pretended it couldn't be made into a knife. He made a small fire. He cut off a piece of bread and a piece of cheese and thought of a dog in a warm yard and of a boy with a broken arm who had learned to favor it without making a fuss. And he smiled into the dark. He fed the fire like a careful man and did not let it get ideas. He dreamed of a red stare and a white sky and a gross thing falling into a mouth of fire and of his hand letting go. He woke without the old clutch in his chest. He lay back down and listened to the little noises of winter coming and thought of a broom crossing a gate stone front and back, turning and turning, keeping a threshold clear. On the third day of riding, he found a road narrowed to a thread between a frozen stream and a copse of alder where 3 men had stacked rocks in the path and a 4th stood with a spear and a fear in his eyes he was hoping to feed on someone else's coin. Sandor stopped stranger 10 paces shy and considered the rocks. He looked at the men and saw the one who would move first and the one whose head would turn to see if anyone was watching and the one who would try to think his way out and be late. "Back up," he said, and his voice carried without shouting. "Find yourselves meat somewhere else." The leader spit. The spit froze where it landed. "We're tolling this way now," he said. "Writ from the king." "You can't read," Sandor said. He took his sword from its home slow and easy and let them watch it come out into the cold air. "Lucky for you I can." He cut the air only a little and the men's courage broke like river ice under a boot. They moved with the awkward speed of men who have not made up their minds to run until their legs did it for them. Stranger snorted and shook his head as if this bored him. Sandor stepped down and kicked the topmost rock off the pile, and then the next, and then the next, and the road opened itself, because that is what roads do if you teach them enough patience. He kept going. He taught the road patience where he found it flavored otherwise. He took bread where bread was given, and paid where it wasn't, and paid double where children had not learned to shut their eyes yet. He spoke to women like they were working because they were. He made small friends with dogs and found that dogs were easier now than they had been, and that he could look at their joy without wanting to grind it under his heel to keep it safe. He took, sometimes, small metal favors from men who could not spare coin. A nail flattened into a fish, a bit of tin punched with a star, and tied them inside his cloak because he liked the weight of memory. He never used the letter. He sent messages anyway, carried by men on good horses and by ravens that had learned the way home from gray-hooded boys who knew the feel of a winter wind. He sent pieces, that a man named so-and-so had stopped asking girls to laugh when they did not feel like it, that the bridge at such-and-such village had been mended, that the nights were quiet 2 miles either side of the inn with the fat-sounding bell because a broom had swept there. He signed none of it. He missed no name. In spring he returned once to the little hall with the 3 hounds carved into its lintel and found that someone had painted them again, careful black on clean gold, and then had made a 4th smaller dog of her own and painted it in the corner like a joke and a blessing. He did not go inside. He stood under the eaves and listened to girls making bread with their hands, to boys making a fence with theirs, to a man telling a story about a captain with feathers who had run as if the road had chased him, and he let the sounds fill him. After, he turned Stranger's head toward the river and the road, and when the dog Bandy tried to follow, he told him once, and Bandy stopped and sat and wagged his tail like the good dog he was. Sandor lifted 2 fingers, and the boy with the once broken arm did the same back. An acknowledgement between men who understand work. The road made itself under him because that is what roads do for men who know what to do with them. He kept watch. He held the small line between gate and field, between well and yard, between a king's writ and a woman's broom. He spoke little and did. He listened for wings and heard them less. He dreamed not of fire but of hinges and latches and the soft thud a door makes when it closes and keeps the weather out. He did not love kings, but he loved the sound of safety when it found its way over a threshold. He beat the mountain and walked away, and every step after was a measured refusal to be the thing that had made him. In this, at last, he found a kind of rest that did not lean on wine or rage or the thick blind need to hit something first. He put his back to trees and walls and watched the smelling, sweating, tender-hurt world as if it were a fire he'd learned to tend. Small, careful, given exactly what it asked and no more, so that it would not get ideas. And when the wind carried children's songs through the hedges, a silly muddle of kings and wolves and dragons, he let them move through him without ache, like a weather that did not need to change to be true.